Most EDH decks don't lose because of their budget. They lose because your commander is a crutch. Your deck is like a Ferrari. It looks flashy, feels unstoppable, until the clutch blows and you lose to a precon. This is how a lot of decks function. They're built specifically around their best games, never planning for a world where your commander isn't out. You want synergy, obviously, but too little? Generic. Too much? Also generic. That's the trap we're breaking down in this video. But before we jump in, what actually is synergy? This isn't a philosophy lecture, I promise. Everyone has an idea in their head, but let's actually define it here. I view synergy as the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. On the surface, a pile of cardboard can look quite unimpressive, but when you see a truly synergistic deck in action, it all clicks. Oh, that goes well with my commander. That's synergy, right? Sort of. A synergistic deck is not a deck with 99 cards to turn on your commander. At this point, most people have heard of the phrase kill on sight commander. If you haven't, then the clue's in the name. Usually a commander is labelled this way, not because of the card in isolation, but because of how it interacts with the rest of the deck. Let's take a look back at a classic, Kalia of the Vast. She was one of the original 5 from the first precons in 2011, and she actually remains the only face commander of the bunch to stand the test of time. Sorry, Animar. Kalia lets us cheat out big flyers at prodigious speeds, but like our Ferrari, as soon as there's a hiccup, it's very costly. Kalia can be super easy to shut down, as she has to wait an entire turn cycle to attack. As well as that, she encourages you to put a bunch of big dudes and dudesses in your deck to ensure that you always have stuff to cheat out. Can you spot the problem? If you've always got 1 or 2 big O's in hand waiting for the call to action, then functionally you're playing with a 5-card hand until you can turn them on. What if that moment never comes though? This often means that games take on a very do or die feel. When your commander survives the turn cycle by some miracle, then you're living the dream, up in the skies with angels, demons and dragons. If you're not so fortunate though, then you're forced to drudge through the game without your engine. Instead, I like to focus on creating an interwoven mesh of synergies within the 99. Now most people will have value engines built into their decks, usually centered around the commander. Personally, I think of my deck as the whole engine. My commander isn't an essential cog, more so the grease which makes everything run smoother. This means that I can generally avoid dead draws, as my cards will either function perfectly fine on their own, or work with a big portion of the deck. My grist deck is actually built around one specific card, Colossal Gravereaver. The idea is to get this guy out and then mill until I can find a combo to win. Now, that sounds like quite a fragile plan. However, the rest of the deck is constructed in a way which functions fine until I find the card. All of those mill cards, which are essential for my combo, will also turn on the rest of the engines in the deck before I get to that point. In this deck, the commander serves to help out each of the different angles that the deck's taking. She can generate tokens to sacrifice, while also milling to support my other engines, including Colossal Gravereaver. Plus, she's got a cheeky bit of removal tacked on, not going to complain. Building your decks in this way makes for a much more enjoyable play experience. It no longer becomes a question of do I win or not, more so whether your deck can do its thing. And when doing your thing revolves entirely around the commander, then it's a lot easier to shut down. The only reason why these decks even pretend to function is because removal is rarer than a politician below retirement age. Now, some commanders are inherently more fragile. However, there are still choices you can make during deck building which mitigate this. Firstly, I would make sure that there's plenty of redundancy for your commander's effect within the deck. Sometimes this is quite simple, other times not so much. Proliferating isn't exactly hard, but there are no cards that I'm aware of with a similar effect to Joda. In the latter case, you could mitigate dependency purely by playing less legends, or selecting only the legends which synergize with the sub-themes already existing in the deck. This means that your legendary cascade is still functioning during the times when your commander is in play, but you aren't necessarily floundering without that extra surge in board presence. Now, some of you might think that this will dilute your game plan. This is definitely true, but if you've ever tried squash straight out of the bottle, then you know that a bit of dilution can improve the end product. For the most part, you won't need 30 legendary creatures to win, but having a few extra utility pieces might make all the difference. Obviously, these are quite specific examples. If we want to generalize this, we could say that if your commander makes one specific theme especially strong, then you might not need as much of that theme as you would expect. This is especially true if the cards from that theme are very weak without that extra bit of support. Returning to the example of Kalia, playing less flyers isn't really an option, neither is playing more castable ones. Since the payoff is so massive here, it will be catastrophic to set up an attack and then only be able to cheat in a Dragon Hatchling. Instead, it's important to have a solid ramp suite so we can actually make casting our flyers part of the plan rather than just having them be dead weight. Conveniently, this will also tie into the main plan, as Kalia generally racks up command attacks very quickly. And the important thing with this is to balance win more cards with actually winning more. A win more card is something which only functions in an already good position, whereas a card which helps you actually win more will be good regardless of the situation. By the way, if you like what I'm talking about, then come check out the Discord. When you're building your next deck, really take a deep look at the cards you're selecting. Does this actually work with my commander? Or is it only good when I'm in a winning position already? That is the key to building decks which function as cohesive units, rather than a bunch of disparate cards held together by the commander. So many people are running fake staples in their deck, which actually hold them back. Check out this video if you want to find out if you are as well.